Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Delivering Business Insights Using Power BI. My name is Garrett Griffin, and along with Dave Taylor, we will be presenting this loveliness to you this morning. Now, all things being equal with the technology gods, we think we've got everything set up right. If there are any issues with regards to the connection, or the audio or the presentation itself, please feel free to use the chat window to convey that, and we'll try to catch that feedback as quickly as we can. For specific questions related to the content today, we should all be able to use the questions panel within the GoToWebinar, GoToMeeting panel. If there's any questions about that or any trouble using that, please feel free to pass those questions into the chat window, which should also be available to everyone. So with that out of the way, and assuming that everyone is able to see the screen, I'm getting an audio feedback here. I'm just going to check on that. There we go. I won't say whose fault that was. I don't want to embarrass her.
That narrows it down.
Yes, it does. All right. So if everybody's ready, let's get stuck into it. So welcome again to Delivering Business Insights Using Power BI. I'm Garrett Griffin, and with me I have Dave Taylor.
Morning.
And today we're going to be canvassing a range of functionalities that sit within the Microsoft stack, now labeled as Power BI. We're going to be talking specifically about Excel, we're going to be talking about SharePoint, and we're going to be talking about Office 365. We will be including quite a bit of demonstration today, so for a change, Garrett's not going to do all the talking. I'm merely going to prompt us along and attempt to manage the webinar and handle any questions that arise.
That's assuming I can shift him up long enough to get a word in.
That's right. So I guess before we get started, just as a quick agenda, today we'd like to take you on a very short but we hope meaningful journey. We're going to discuss and demonstrate a very powerful set of tools, some of which you may already possess and may not realize it. Others you may not be aware even exist at all, and we hope you will find enlightening and readily accessible. That journey is going to start with a bit of definitions. The first thing that we can do today is we can call out what seems to be consistent within the realm of business insights. And I think we would choose to call that as confusion. When we look at the landscape that comprises reporting and dashboards and data warehousing and analytics, it's become quite a maelstrom, quite a confused landscape in terms of what the technologies are and what the specific outcomes are that we're trying to achieve. The desire of organizations to understand the content and data that make up their day-to-day existence is not really new. And despite technology bringing new capabilities to bear every day, it also brings new terminology and perspectives that can be hard to sort out. This is especially true as we don't often know the questions to ask of our information until we have started to examine it. At the end of the day, words like insight or power are fairly meaningless unless we know the questions we are trying to answer. At OBS, we like to strip away those layers of technology and marketing spin wherever possible to try and get at the core of what it is we're doing when we study our information. We believe that information only becomes useful at the moment we perceive it in a manner that answers the questions we have or raises the questions that we don't. This is what we would refer to as insight, and from it we believe that we can derive power to make better decisions. Generically, we use the term information visualization to refer to all of these scenarios. So whether we're throwing a number onto a screen as a KPI or metric, or whether we are driving self-service reporting portals, we are generally talking about different flavors and forms of information visualization. We believe it's those moments of perception that create the value. and we believe they're achieved at the point of visualization, and that the mess of technologies, approaches, and formats in which we find ourselves tangled ultimately have visualization as their desired outcome. So the Power BI story begins with what some find a surprising tool, one most of us are already using today for one thing or another. Here's the riddle. What happens when Microsoft suddenly embraces the realization of tens of millions of copies of Microsoft Excel being used in the world today and decides to make it the cornerstone of their modern business intelligence offering? The answer is Power BI. Power BI was born and continues to evolve with the understanding there couldn't be anything more familiar, available, and powerful than bringing hardcore data analysis and visualization into the tool people have used for years to manage their lists, calculate their numbers, build their forms, and generate their charts. For the first part of our demonstration today, Dave is going to share with us some of the things that we can achieve right now using just a copy of Excel and a SharePoint instance with Excel services enabled. We're not going to touch on the things that you can do natively in Excel by itself. We assume that everybody's already familiar with how to create a list, drive a calculation, or develop a chart in Excel. So that would be minimum required understanding to proceed. With that, I'm actually going to hand over to Dave, and we're going to dive right into the first part of the Power BI story, starting with Excel, and Excel used in the context of SharePoint.
Awesome. Thank you, Garrett. Okay, let's see what I can find. So to get this ball rolling, what I've got is a pretty straightforward Excel spreadsheet. Let's have a quick look at that. We're actually using Office 365 to demonstrate this, just in case anybody's interested. So it's nice and easy. It's a simple trial Power BI trial license we've fired up, which is going to be there for 30 days, and we'll hopefully leave you with some access to get to it afterwards. So I have, as I say, a simple spreadsheet here. I've got two tabs. Let's have a look at the targets here. All the data we're going to look at today, by the way, relates to Marine Rescue Queensland. Some of you may know already, I'm a volunteer skipper with Marine Rescue at the weekends. So I have access to some of this data and figured it might as well make some use of it to give some examples for you. So the Marine Rescue is split into 4 different zones. We've got Northern, Gulf, Central, Moreton Bay and Southern zones. And what we're looking at here is just some example fuel usage. So what I've got is some targets, target fuel usage for the different zones across different quarters. On the other tab, what I've got is a named area here called zone, which I'll show you in a second. So if I change this, I think, yeah, except I'm not in edit mode, but if I change that, it will actually change these as well. So it's just using a lookup here on the target, so it pulls through the correct target, and I've just got some example actual values in there again, which we'll see afterwards. The chart here, pretty straightforward. You can see the data that's coming through at the bottom, and just combined columns to show the target and the actual. So now we've got that, let's have a look at what we can do with it. So in its very simplest form, if I edit this page, this may be something a lot of you have done already. So I'm going to go to Insert a Web Part, and under Business Data, we have an Excel Web Access Web Part. So add that to my page. Good start. Click here to open the tool pane. And here's my properties of my web part. So I can now go off and choose my workbook. I know it's in my documents library. There's my zones spreadsheet. And in this case, I'm going to put, chart in as a named item. So there's lots of other options there on the web part. I'm not going to go through all those, but feel free to investigate at some point. So now, if I just save my page, just come out of edit mode, I've now got my Excel Web access web part on the page, and you can see the chart there. It actually also shows the other named areas in the spreadsheet, so I can actually just flick through those very quickly. You remember I said zone was a named web part, in that case defaulting to northern. I've got my targets, which we had a look at, and there's my chart. So pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Almost straight away we've got some information on the page pulled through from Excel. Well, that's a good start, but Garrett also mentioned Excel REST, which is one of the best kept secrets, I think, of the combined Excel SharePoint world. So let's have a quick look what we can do with that. I've actually got another window open here which is going to the same sort of area, so let's have a look here. What I'm going to do is just start typing here in the URL. So I've got VTI bin. You can see here I've already done some practice runs here. Excel REST. That's telling it I want to use the Excel REST web service. What I then do is tell it the folder or the library where I'm looking. I tell it the name of the file that I'm interested in, and what I then want to do is have a look at what models are available. So if I just fire it up at that point, you can see here there's a variety of options available within this REST model. So I can look at ranges, which is basically just data ranges within the Excel chart, the Excel spreadsheet. I can look at charts, so if we've got any specific named charts, tables, pivot tables, and sheets. So fair bit of flexibility here in what I want to look at. In this case, I'm interested in charts, and specifically a chart called chart. You can see I'm very inventive with my names. So let's have a quick look what that does. So what that's done using a URL is to dip into the Excel spreadsheet and pull back that chart we were interested in. Cool, that's kind of handy. However, what else can we do? So if I go a stage further, I'm not going to type all this, but you can see that the additional bit it's trying to add in here. So if I then say the ranges, so in this case, let me get rid of that bit. So if I just add in ranges, and again, named area, ranges zone equals Moreton Bay. So what it does then is redraw the chart based on that bit of information I'm sending through. So I'm telling it I want to look specifically at the Moreton Bay zone. Now, if I go even further, I can tell it what actuals to use. So in this case, I'm passing through some of the actual values, and again, you'll see the chart redraw with some different actual values specifically for Moreton Bay. Well, that's pretty powerful, I hope you'd agree, but what else could we actually do with it? So if we go back here and we edit our page, and now in here I insert a picture from an address and I paste in that URL I've just been putting together. Again, what I've now got is my chart being pulled through from Excel and rendered as an image on my page. Again, kind of nice. However, just go even further than that. How can we combine that? So what we want to do is make it a bit more dynamic. So in this case, I've got a list. You can see my different zones for my list. And what I've got, again, is for my quarters. And I've got some actual values here to go along with the targets that we had in the Excel spreadsheet. So what I'm now going to do is go to my dashboard view. And what this is doing now is using a JS link rendering. So it's actually taking the value or the values from my list item, passing those values through. You'll see those values match here, re-rendering the chart as an image and passing that back to each list item. So each list item has its own individual chart that's been drawn by Excel and passed back to the view. I think that's really, really powerful, very, very friendly, quick way of doing dashboarding and giving you a lot of control from Excel. So you can control what the chart looks like, the different colors, etc. All the formatting is done from Excel, and then it's just rendered using some of the data from your list. Pretty good, I reckon. Okay, I'm going to hand you back to Garrett.
Like you, Dave, that makes me very, very excited. Shall we start selling products now?
Absolutely.
So with basic Excel and Excel services features now under our belts and demonstrated, what else can we do? Where do we go to from here? If you got excited as Dave and I both get about just that capability alone, and as you can see, I've been prompting with phrases such as dashboards, dynamic dashboards. We have a tremendous capability just right there, provided we've got that enterprise licensing in place to enable Excel services to render a great deal of our information visualization needs right within SharePoint. But the Power BI story goes on. A few years ago, Microsoft added to their business intelligence toolkit the Power Pivot and the Power View tools. This pair came out roughly together and extended once again within the Excel editing environment or design environment the capabilities to connect to a greater number of data sources, to handle much larger data sources in memory, and also to give us a new realm of interactive visualizations that we can perform, and incidentally, that we can design with a very minimum of fuss. So with that very broad statement, I'm going to hand back to Dave, who's going to talk now about how we can use Power Pivot within Excel, within SharePoint, and we're going to touch on Power View as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Garrett. Okay, so this time I've got Excel here. I've got Excel open. I've already got some data in here. So I already mentioned we're going to be using the marine rescue data. What I've got is data relating to incidents. So essentially every time a rescue vessel goes in the water, we raise an online activation form, and that captures what the activation was for, and that could be training, it could be rescuing somebody, it could be towing them back to a base, it could be any combination of different things. It captures how many people, so how many persons were on board, how many people we saved, how much fuel we used, etc., etc., etc. So a collection of bits and pieces of information that we capture. So what I'm going to do is take a look at that now, and I've got a combination of Excel content. So you can see here I've got some information in Excel. I've got a number of different tabs in Excel that's giving me access to some of that information. Some of these are Power View tabs, which I'll come back to in a second. But in the meantime, let's have a quick look at Power Pivot. So when you enable Power Pivot is included within Excel, the professional versions of Excel anyway, and you just need to enable it, you just need to turn it on within the add-ins. So when you do that, you get another tab at the top for Power Pivot, and I'm just going to click on Manage here, and it will take me and show me the Power Pivot information I've got underneath. Now, Power Pivot is using, or Excel in this case, is using something called vertical compression to capture a whole heap of data. I'm using something like 65,000 rows of data here, so it's not a massive amount of information. I've seen this demoed by Microsoft with about 130 million rows of data, and getting instant response times. So what it's doing is actually compressing the data vertically, which gets it down to a very small data size, and then actually uses in-memory management of that data. So that's why you get very, very fast response times against quite large sets of data. Okie dokie. So what do we have in here? I've got a sort of one-to-one relationship between some of the information that's come through from Excel tabs, but I've also got information such as this one that has come directly from a database. The greyed out areas are ones that I've decided not to pass through. So I've got, you can see here the engine fuel is available, and I've scrolled across, you've got the number of hours that were used on a particular trip, the time of day, persons on board, etc. So I've got some information that I've passed through. I can do calculated columns. So one of the issues or challenges I've found is that persons on board, while logically it was going to be a number, that wasn't necessarily the way some people had captured it. So what I found is that there were some that said 2 plus 2, presumably 2 adults and 2 children, but that doesn't translate very well into a single number. I've seen 2 plus 3 plus 1, which I think is 2 adults, 3 children and 1 dog. I've also seen 1 plus 1 canine, which again I'm thinking is 1 plus 1 dog. So what I obviously need to do is a bit of cleansing on that data to make it usable. So I've got some calculated columns here, and you can see some of the standard sort of Excel type calculations that allow me to work out and cleanse my data to make it usable. Another thing I can do is create some what I call calculated measures here, which are actually looking at the information on a more global scale. So here you can see again, fairly straightforward, I've got a value called incident count, and the value of that is a formula which is count of the incident IDs. So fairly simple, fairly straightforward. One of the things that came out of Power Pivot is also a new formula base called year-to-date formulas. So in this case, I've got a total year-to-date, which I'm doing as a sum of the engine fuel and basing it on a date. Now what that does is give me a total amount of fuel used within a year, and that will increment based on the date that I'm at in a particular year. And I'll show you how I use that shortly, but that's very, very powerful in terms of being able to pull information together. Okay, another thing, let's just have a quick look at the diagram view here. This is just a representation of those different tabs that we had across the bottom, our different chunks of data, and how they're linked. So for example here, action taken is linked by, action taken ID with action taken ID within here. So we've got these two different identifiers, if you like, within the incident table, within the action taken, and the activation for, etc. So this is how you create the relationship. So these are simple drag and drops between these relationships. So it's very simple to maintain them and collect them. But this is what makes the Power Pivot so powerful, if you like, in terms of you do the work within Power Pivot, get this bit right, and the whole thing then makes it very, very easy when you start to present it and visualize it within Power View.
Just these tools here, Dave, would it be safe to say that the capability they offer, though perhaps not for a large-scale project, if we wanted to do some rapid modeling for database design or for data warehousing projects, would this be a quick and dirty tool that we could use to perform those functions?
Absolutely. I mean, I'd probably steer clear of the term quick and dirty because that's got nasty connotations. However, yeah, absolutely. This is really, really powerful. One of the traditional issues with the standard sort of BI type projects is the time it takes. So essentially the way it often works is you sort of identify what it is you think you want, hand it all over to a bunch of BI consultants who go off and build a data warehouse and cubes and cleanse data and all that exciting stuff. And then eventually they start building some sort of visualization on top of that, maybe 9, 12, 15 months, 18 months down the line, and you take a look at it and say, well, actually that isn't quite what I wanted. What I'd like is this instead, and they say, oh yeah, no problem, we'll take that back and we'll be back with you in 6 months' time because we've got to rework the data warehouse, etc. to get there. Very much this is a case of being able to get in very quickly, use information very quickly, and get to that visualization element, probably within a day, I would say. The work here within Power Pivot is probably about a day's work to get to a cohesive, usable Power Pivot set of data, and then putting visualizations on the top is probably a couple of hours per visualization. So much, much, much quicker than the traditional approach to a BI project. So I would say definitely this is a great way of getting something in place very quickly. If it's transitory, then I would say this is it. Don't go any further. Just use it as it is, and then replace it as the data changes or as the concept changes underneath it. Don't ever bother turning this into something bigger and uglier. However, if it's something as an organisation that you know is going to be reasonably static and going to be reasonably used by a wide audience across the organisation, then by all means use this as your model and pass this to your you know, BI gurus that then turn it into something. But at least they've now got something they can start to work with. And by the way, when you upload an Excel file with Power Pivot in it to SharePoint, what it does is create a SQL tabular data source. We know Excel is a single user tool, right? So we don't really want multiple users using Excel as the form. So what it does is create this tabular data source and then access that when multiple users try and make use of the information within SharePoint. So it's actually making it a grown-up tool almost straight away. And what your BI gurus can do is take that tabular data source and use that as the start point. So if you want to introduce things like, for example, row-level permissions, if you want row-level control of access, then you can't do that within Power Pivot. If you want to introduce that level of complexity, then you would need to start making direct changes to the database.
So just taking one scenario out of that, if we were doing enterprise data management work or standardization across our data sources, the ability to mart or data mart referential data from different systems might be possible using this tool and then sharing that out from SharePoint itself.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, one of the interesting things, I mean, if we go back a couple of years to the floods and things we had within Brisbane, the data that was available on where the flooding was, how high the flooding was changing so rapidly that the traditional BI approach of, you know, hand a new set of data off to your BI guys and then a couple of weeks later they come back because they've then wrapped it into your cube was just way too slow. And this model, this concept, allows you to wrap data in very quickly and simply. So you can grab data, drop it into an Excel, you know, tab worksheet within Excel, throw that into your Power Pivot, use this type view, the diagram view, to link it into the rest of your data. You obviously need some keys in there, some to tie it in. But other than that, that's it. You've then got that new data available and accessible within Power Pivot.
So for those in our audience who might not be comfortable with entity diagrams, what can we do to visualize this data now that we've prepared it?
Yeah, thank you, Garrett. Yeah, moving on. Let me just close that bit down. Okay, so I'll do this initially within Excel, but then I'll just show you it is exactly the same within SharePoint as well. So basically, I've got tabs here. So if I fire up my Excel here, then what I've got here is just a representation of the count of incidents by the different zones. I've got the different types of activations, so you can see here breakdowns, drifting vessels, e-purpose flares, etc. And again, just a representation of the types across the bottom. And these are the different squadrons. We've got 25 different squadrons across those 5 different zones. Now, one of the great things about Power View that this is built in. This information, by the way, is all coming from the right-hand side here, which is my Power Pivot. So this is the Power Pivot stuff that we've just been representing. So within my incidents, I've got those calculations. So there's the engine fuel that I put together with my calculated value. And further down here, I've got my persons on board calculation, time of day, etc. So they're the values, the columns that I told Power Pivot I wanted to be visible and available. I can then drop these values onto the page. Now the great thing is that these are all related. So if, for example, I click on Moreton Bay Zone, Training Patrol, click on here, what that actually does is narrow down this view to only show me the 5 different squadrons that are within Moreton Bay. And it also now trims this view to only represent what I'm getting from Moreton Bay Zone. So very powerful in terms, and training, very powerful in terms of presenting the information that you want to see. So if I narrow that down for Moreton Bay, for example, I can see the breakdown of the individual elements as opposed to just looking at training for Moreton Bay. But you can see, hopefully at a glance there, the great way of presenting this interactive set of information very quickly, very simply. One of the very dynamic ways of presenting information. This is what they call a bubble chart. And again, this is time-based. So this is, if you remember, I was talking about year-to-date type values. So in this case, I've filtered to a particular year. I'm looking at 2011 in this instance. On the upper count here, I've got a year-to-date value for the incident count. Across the x-axis, I've got the amount of fuel used, and the size of these individual blobs is based on the persons that were on board, persons that have been saved. Now, what you can actually do with this type of view linked into a date value is to play it. And what it does, it works through the year. You can see the different blobs changing size as they go across and moving across the X and Y axes based on the year-to-date values. Very, very powerful, very dynamic way of presenting that information. But going beyond that, what you can actually do is select an individual. So if we take Jacob's Well, for example, it shows me that particular trend, that thread for Jacob's Well. I can step manually through the individual periods and see any particular point in time how that reflects and relates based on the information that's coming out of that power pivot again. Another one, let's have a look here. Yeah, let's have a look at these locations. So again, this particular one is looking at the different zones, but we've now got Bing maps coming in behind it. Again, the size of these is based on the duration, the average duration of callouts, and again, I can filter by year, etc., if I so wish. So I can just nip around the individual zones. So this is our northern zone going from Mackay. Southern zone, this is the Gold Coast area, so this is looking at, we've got, yeah, Karumbin. They do tend to do longer trips. They tend to go out into the open water a little bit more. We've got Southport, very, very busy, but they tend to operate in a close area. And there we've got Jacob's Well, just a bit further up, and managing the jumping pin type area. So, yeah, an interesting way of presenting information very, very quickly. Let me just show you that as well within area. So if I go back to my home page and I open up my spreadsheet, exactly the same spreadsheet, it's just that this is within SharePoint. So this is now going to look at it with Excel Online. And there we go, exactly the same functionality, so same dynamic presentation of the content, same big maps in the background, and that's all just working through SharePoint, in this case Office 365, so this is presenting that Excel spreadsheet through SharePoint. Okay, Garrett, back to you.
Just we'll take a pause. We've had two questions. First of all, what is the name of the bubble chart that Dave has just presented? I provided an answer that it is sometimes referred to as the King of the Hill visualization. We otherwise refer to it as the bubble chart. I'm not sure if it has any other official name.
Yeah, that's a good question. I generally think of it as a scatter chart, but let's have a look. If I edit my workbook here, go to fuel period. Yeah, so within Power BI terminology, it's called a scatter chart. So they're calling it a scatter chart within here.
And the other question that we've had is what sort of configuration is required for the big map visualization?
Actually, none at all. So you can see here one of the options within Power View is to insert a map, and literally it uses the Latin long information that's coming from the data to decide which bit of the map it shows.
Now, in the case of Power View, is it interpreting Latin long from a geolocation name, or must you have the Latin long information precisely declared within your data?
Yeah, good question. In this case, I'm using specific Latin long data. So I've got Latin longitude, as you can see, available here. Though my understanding is you can actually use area type information as well. So you can use states or cities or that type of thing, and it will recognize those too.
This would make sense. It's jumping the gun a bit, but one of the other tools that we're going to touch on today, Power Query, I know does also provide that capability to interpret various kinds of geonaming information and actually glean the Latin launch information from it. But we'll take a look at that later. Great, so getting back to our guiding deck. So we've seen, again, Excel is the starting point and in many cases the ending point for our information visualization. Sorry, Dave, you're behind in slides.
Oh, sorry.
One more? There we go. So with the Power BI suite of tools as it's been repackaged, we can see that Excel and SharePoint combined with Power Pivot and Power View go about 10 miles down the road in terms of getting us most of the visualization that we might require for self-service analysis, for dashboarding, and a range of other applications. But yes, in fact, there's more. There's even more. And in this case, we're going to say that it's a little bit different than what's been presented previously, simply because we're talking about additional add-ins, but now add-ins that are potentially overlapping some of that capability or extending it. The two particular tools we're going to take a look at now are Power Query and Power Map. Dave will talk about and demonstrate what he can about both of these. Broadly, Power Query is another tool built within Excel as an add-on that allows us to connect to a variety of data sources. One of the focus points for Power Query included the ability to more readily access open data or publicly available data on the web. So we have within Power Query many of the same options in terms of connecting to Excel data, connecting to our internal data sources, and what have you. But we also have an extended capability to interpret geo information and also to pull in public data sets using a web-based search. So we'll see if we can get through part of that. Power Map, of course, is exactly what you might expect. It's a very powerful map visualization. These tools respectively provide touch points for accessing those public data stores, but in a way that can be represented geographically and geographically over time. So with that, let's dive in, and everybody cross your fingers that these visualizations, being a little bit more load intensive, will work just fine for the presentation.
Yeah. Thank you, Garrett. Okay, so if we come back to our worksheet here, Power Map is accessible through the, believe it or not, the Insert tab. So I've got Map here, Launch Power Map. Let's have a quick look what's going to give us here. So I've got one predefined here. Again, I'm going to use the marine rescue data. It's just opening up for me, hopefully. There we go. So in this instance, again, we've got all these Bing background maps. We can create a number of different scenes and what they call a tour. We can visualize, represent a whole variety of different, again, data. This is still bringing data from our Power Pivot source. We could just as easily pull data from Power Query, which Garrett's just been talking about there. I've got different representations of the information here, so the different layers, as we call them, can be, in this case I've got some stack bar charts, I've also got some heat map representations, and you can also link them to customized backgrounds as well, so you don't necessarily have to use the Bing maps. Where this thing really comes into its own, I guess, is by creating these tours and then presenting and playing them. So let me just run this through play and see what that does for us. What's that doing?
Not a lot.
No, it doesn't look right. Let me just stop that and try again.
Let's try that one again. Even under the best of circumstances, rendering any kind of video or animation over these presentations is going to be thin and choppy. But we'll take a crack at it because it really is worth having a look at. Just by the way, in terms of the slide deck, in terms of the comment streams and some additional resources. We will be making all of that available to everyone following the conclusion of today's session. That also includes access to an Office 365 demo instance where we've been performing these demonstrations. We've actually got that set up to share with everybody.
Keep talking, Garrett. Keep talking.
Keep talking. Vamp, vamp. So what else can we say? Just touching on a question, I'll let you chime in on this as well. Regarding the in-memory data in Power Pivot, does it mean that the size of Excel file will not be increased in proportion to the size of the in-memory data? What I've answered is that your ultimate saved on-disk file size will be impacted by the amount of data that you have, but that being said, it's not limited by the traditional Excel row limits, and it is also highly compressed data, so it is reasonably disk efficient.
Yeah. So I think that's a reasonable answer, Garrett. You're absolutely right. It's not in proportion. So because of that compression, what I've seen as an example, I worked with one client where we were working with about 12 million rows of data and reasonable breadth of data. That compressed down to around, I think it was somewhere between 250 and 300 megabyte file.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yep. Which, as you can imagine, fits, on most PCs that have got, 2, 4, 8 gig of memory. It's really not a problem juggling that sort of amount of data in memory.
And of course, it's all about big data these days, isn't it, Dave?
Oh, yeah.
How's our visualization coming there?
I think we're back. Yeah, I've just reloaded my Excel. I think it ran out of resources, so it was struggling somewhere. So let me just try again and play this tour. So as you can see here, you can create these sort of flyover effects. You can also make them dynamic based on time. I've not introduced that in this one. I don't know if anybody knows Moreton Bay, but here we've got North Stradbroke Island. That's Moreton Island. Coming up here, we've got Maclay Island. This is Cuchimudlo Island, right next to Victoria Point. And here we've got Marine Rescue Raby Bay, which is at the end of Cleveland Point. This is Raby Bay, all the canals. And then that's zooming out again to have a look at the different zones. So this is our Gulf Zone, Northern Zone, Central Zone with Fraser Island just hiding behind there. And then we've got the Moreton Bay and Southern Zones, which are fairly compressed together there, you can see. So very quick, very dynamic way of looking, representing the information. I'd say it's a fairly niche thing. I don't think it's something you're necessarily going to be showing to every individual. They're not going to be looking at that on a day-to-day basis. But certainly a powerful way of presenting information to a more executive team, or perhaps as as part of a business case or something along those lines.
I recall actually that the first demo kit that came out with PowerMap back when it was called GeoFlow represented power consumption information for suburbs, I believe, in Portland or Seattle over a period of time. And that particular heat map was able to represent the variations in consumption of energy based on the age of the neighborhoods. So there's some really intelligent multi-dimensional representations geographically that you can represent. The tool is also nice enough to follow the Power View principle in that most things can be accomplished in just a few clicks, and gives us the ability to export these to videos for use in presentations or online.
Absolutely.
So in this case, Microsoft has definitely done right by us and themselves, and made tools that are producing a tremendous amount of value with a very low overhead in terms of technical knowledge.
Yeah, I'm just having a quick look, Garrett. I might even have that utility demo if it still works in this version of PowerMap. So let me just have a quick look if you would like to see that.
We'll give it one crack here.
Yeah.
So just recapping, we've started with good old Excel. We've stayed in good old Excel as a great tabular data management tool in its own right. We have seen how we can begin to leverage that experience within SharePoint to begin to publish information dynamically or statically. We've seen some of the add-ins that have come along in the Business Intelligence Suite at Microsoft to allow us to access more and more rich and multidimensional data sources, online data sources, open data sources. And we've seen some of the different visualization capabilities that are beginning to open up. beyond just basic static charts to begin to represent that information dynamically. Here it is, yes.
So yeah, as Garrett was saying, what this is actually doing is taking a look at the built-up areas and now representing the residences by decades. So we've got 1910s, 20s, 30s, etc. It's going to zoom into an area at the moment. It's looking at the power consumption now as a heat map underneath there, and it's just going to zoom into an area that's got a combination of, I think it's 60s and 80s. So you've got 60s either side, 80s in the middle. And you can see the obvious extended use of power in the 60 zones because of obviously much less insulation, etc. So they're using a lot more power than the 1980s buildings, which were obviously built a lot more efficiently and effectively.
So we've had a few additional questions come through. Does the Power Map have a voiceover function embedded within the playback? And my short answer to that is we do not believe so, or do we have the ability to record presentation?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So there is an option here to create video, and as part of that, you can include some audio, an audio layer. So we have created a video. I'm not going to try and do it dynamically because it does take a while, as anybody that's done any video rendering will know. But if we just have a quick look here, oops. I probably want to do that in, no, it's fine. So that's just playing the video. I have put it onto the home page of the demo site as well as a
MV file.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, just as a media web part. It does tend to buffer a little bit because it's about a 50 meg file, but it does play fine. So if you do want to take a look at that, feel free.
For anybody who is looking for a solution for any kind of post-editing or video production, many of us will be familiar with Camtasia. It is possible actually to get quite a lot of work done within the 30-day trial in Camtasia, not that they necessarily want that broadly advertised, but it is extremely simple to use, very powerful in terms of creating a multi-layered video presentation, and its editing capabilities are second to none. So highly recommended if you need to do any serious video production work. We in fact use that internally for any post-production on our webinars and what have you.
Are you still in Camtasia as well?
I am indeed. So another question that's come through, how does or can PowerMap render through SharePoint? I think you've partially answered that. We can create a video file that can then be presented within SharePoint. However,
yeah, that's correct. At the moment, to my knowledge, there's no way to actually represent PowerMap directly through the SharePoint interface. So you only get to PowerMap through Excel.
Right. Okay. So I think we're ready to go straight to the finish, aren't we? Let me just catch up with you here. So, Office 365. What is Office 365? This might be recap for those who are already using 365 or familiar with 365, but we'd like to include this definition nonetheless. So a lot of customers we encounter, or at least some, don't necessarily understand the totality of what Office 365 is. Office 365 is essentially a collection of some very familiar on-premise tools managed and hosted by Microsoft and presented as a cloud-based or SaaS service on a subscription basis. Depending on the plan and depending on the configuration, you have access to Exchange and Outlook for email. You've got Lync for communications and presence and messaging. You've got SharePoint Online included with most plans. You've got, of course, being Office, you've got web-based and install-on-demand versions of the Office applications. That's key. And other bits and pieces as time goes on. So it's a collection of tools that your subscription buys. When we talk about Power BI, the E3 plans and the Pro Plus plans include access per user to the Power BI toolkit. Now what this means is if you're downloading Excel or you're using Excel, you've got access to all of the suite of add-ins. It also means that you've got additional tools in Office 365 that are not necessarily part of the Excel experience. For example, the ability to create a reporting portal site or a Power BI site where reports can be published and lodged. We've also got additional tools that provide natural language querying across data sets that have been built within the Power BI framework or access to the Power BI framework. In the case of Power View, we've got HTML5 capable artifacts that can be viewed, as opposed to the current or Silverlight, I believe.
Yeah, it is still Silverlight at the moment. In fact, let me just show this very quickly, just so we understand what's there and what isn't there.
So the role of Office 365 is interesting. Given how Microsoft is moving, most of their feature development is going to lead with their online tools. They're trying to push us to the cloud. They're trying to make the cloud the first place that new features arrive. And in some cases, the lag in feature deployment between online and on-premise versions of their products can be quite significant. In some cases, 6 to 12 months is not unheard of. So it's still Excel, it's still SharePoint, and it's still the other Power BI add-ons, but it's extended with a few additional features, and it's accessible ubiquitously between desktop and cloud. The Power BI toolkit with Office 365 subscription is also moving in the direction of native applications, and we've just recently seen and are beginning to scratch the surface in terms of native applications for accessing the reporting frameworks. Sorry, Dave, I cut you off there.
No, not at all. I've just literally, there's a little icon down the bottom right-hand corner here. So what I've done is just kick this into the HTML5 view, and you can see it works in exactly the same way as the Silverlight. And in fact, in some ways, it looks a bit slicker to me than the Silverlight one did. So nice to see that that's been introduced. And again, yeah, so this is all working exactly the same way. The scatter chart didn't used to work. Yeah, it looks like the play option on the scatter chart isn't there yet. Okay, so they've still got a bit of work to do there, but it's definitely, I mean, this wasn't working at all when I looked at this a month or so ago. So this has obviously progressed again, and will continue to progress. So this HTML5 is literally in a sort of beta version, if you want to call it that, but certainly coming together quite nicely. The other thing that we haven't mentioned, Garrett, is there's actually an app, a Windows 8 8.1 app for Power BI that allows the charts and visualization actually to be viewed through app.
And that includes the interactivity.
Yep.
Do you want to touch quickly on, because I also don't think we've mentioned the interaction with PowerPoint and Power View?
Yeah, that's a good one. So interestingly, again, I don't think this is available at the moment through Office 365, but if you have the on-premises version of Power BI, where you've got the Excel services, SQL and SharePoint both in integrated mode, then what you can do is create visualizations separate to, using Power View, create visualizations separate to the Excel chart. So you can create them as individual files. When you create those, you actually have an ability to export that to PowerPoint. And what that does is literally put your Power View visualization, your Power View report into PowerPoint as a PowerPoint slide, and then gives you that full interaction within PowerPoint. So yeah, great.
So we can change our refiners and filters within PowerPoint during presentation.
Yeah, that full interaction, all available in PowerPoint.
So we've had another question come through. Is there any plug-in app for Outlook that can show a chart or Power View, Power Map in an Outlook email? I'm unaware of any.
Wow. I think the quick answer has to be no, because both, at the moment, both Power View or particularly Power Map is only available within Excel.
Unless, of course, a third-party thing is available. However, that being said, the ability to make static or to render video, what have you, and then go through a normal embedding process to your email might be possible. We're going to ignore that message. That's not a message we want to pay any attention
So
to.
I think no is the quick, easy answer. Sadly.
Great. Okay. Right, we've had a few connection issues. Looks like they've been restored. So where to from here? I think at this point, we'd like to bring some resources on screen. We're good for time, so if there are any other additional questions that people want to pop into chat or questions window, we're happy to talk to those things. I guess summarizing, and maybe a little personal commentary as well. As Dave and others have helped me come into what the Power BI story is, the first surprise for me was that really much of this is just Excel. We use buzzwords like Power BI, we use SharePoint in different contexts, we use Office 365, but ultimately 80+% of what we're doing is happening within Excel. And the avenues through which we have to visualize or to publish or to share or combine these different capabilities is of course going to be dependent on your business needs. The other exciting piece for me personally, having a background in some data warehousing work previously, is that the amount of energy that is normally required to do our modeling and our mapping, even just to get our heads right about approaching a reporting situation or a data warehousing situation, used to be quite tremendous. Now, in every case, we're able to talk to clients and say, look, save yourselves some headache. Do some rapid prototyping using these tools. Get quick connections to do your mashups and get quick visualizations out to the business for that agile, immediate feedback. And get those loops started now with tools that you already possess. There's absolutely no reason not to use them. And in fact, whether you intend to expose these things directly for editing to users or not, you're still within a framework of technology that everybody's familiar with and that IT departments are, more importantly, familiar with in terms of how to lock it down and how to keep it, keep the genie in the bottle if that's the desired outcome. We're going to provide some resources in closing, as we mentioned. We've thrown a few links together. First of all, the main Power BI website at Microsoft has started to come together a bit better. The messaging's a bit clearer, and the footer navigation in particular has links to demo environments. There are some fantastic examples that were done for the Power BI contest that are linkable from the bottom of that page as well. We've also included a link to a reasonably famous video now. It's about 11 minutes long, and it is the release presentation of the product manager at the 2013 World Partner Conference in Texas. It is well worth a watch, and it's quite humorous as well. It's a great one to put in front of your decision makers or executives if they're trying to get their head around what Power BI is. We've also included a link to a wonderful little self-service Excel BI guide. It's got some great how-to information as to getting stuck into using Excel and these various tools to solve immediate business problems. So, right on time, we would like to thank everybody for your attention today. We hope that it has been fruitful, and we encourage you to tap into the resources that we've provided. As well, feel free to log in, at least for the next 30 days, to the demo Office 365 environment, or SharePoint environment that we've created there. We'll pass these details around. Kick the tires. Don't be afraid of breaking anything, and enjoy. If anyone has any further questions or would like one-on-one demonstrations of this type of material, please feel free to contact us at OBS. We'd be happy to help. We hope you've enjoyed. And everybody have a great week, or weekend, as the case may be.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Nice to have you all around, and thanks to Garrett for coordinating and letting me just get on with presenting.
For a change. All right, thanks everybody. Bye bye now.